All right.
Yeah, that.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, it's just no. You go ahead if we're live.
We're live. We are live indeed. All right. So today we're actually going to be taking a look at a little bit more of a esoteric concept, but still obviously applicable to everybody in a sense. That's the idea of human beings destroying quite a bit of the wealth that they accumulate through burials and sacrifice. It's probably not as common now as it was before, but prior eons, a lot of the wealthy would be buried with their trinkets and sometimes their slaves and that type of thing, right? So it's a very peculiar practice, and we just wanted to go over it. So, as you suggested, the topic, Price, you want to kick us off with your preamble?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, basically, as you said, it's the idea of destroying wealth. And, listening to ancient history, it becomes very clear that this has been going on across cultures and throughout human history, at the very least until relatively modern times. And I think there'd be an argument to be made as to potentially some aspects of that carrying through to modern times, like being innate to human nature. And then arguments as to whether or not it actually has fundamentally changed. But the very obvious examples are the mass graves. And as far as I understand it, prehistory, there's kind of a delineation between when you have big graves showing up and these sort of burial mounds that contain a lot of stuff. And that's kind of like, oh, now we've got society because they're burying people with lots of stuff. So it kind of seems to indicate almost the beginning of a strong society is that, oh, this guy was rich and led us and he died. So now we're just going to bury a bunch of his stuff with him as opposed to, inheriting it and using it for ourselves. And I find that on the face of it is quite bizarre because you think of that in a modern context and it's like, if your grandparent died and say they had $100,000 in valuable stuff, you're not going to just throw that in the grave with them, shovel some dirt on top of it, and be like, "Yeah, nobody gets an inheritance. He needed to be down there in the dirt with what he had during his life." So it's just really not the modern attitude. It would definitely be considered a waste to throw in, say, $100,000 of gold into the casket. I can't really think of any situation where that isn't the case now, but maybe there's some cultures where there's still maybe a golden casket itself might exist. That might be a thing people do. But it's really odd. It seems very inefficient, especially since these are the people at the top of the society, to just say, yep, their wealth is now going to the afterlife with them, which is to say it's being removed from our living society, relegated to the realm of the dead, or more realistically, grave robbers, or the next tribe that finds us and doesn't care for our dead bodies. Or, if we're lucky, archaeologists in the distant future who can dig it up and find out about our culture. So
Well,
I think I think that covers the preamble.
I was gonna say I think that you're probably touching on a few things there, where it's like a lot of that is like religious in nature, obviously, because I think in secular societies, like where it's just the general prevailing view of the world is materialistic and rooted in secular thinking, where you're dead, you're worm food kind of attitude to everything. Obviously, it would be a waste to provide any sort of material possessions or whatever to someone in their gravesite.
Yeah.
But obviously, I think that your big shift would be around like a lot of these cultures, prehistoric cultures, would have been like shamanistic and very religious, right? Where it's more like you're not wasting it, you're sending it off. You're giving it to them, you're providing it to them in the next life, which is definitely a thing in their minds, right? Like it's
Yeah.
not like an abstract to them. It's like definite, guaranteed like part of their thinking. I don't know. I think it's very hard for modern peoples to even like begin to put themselves in that mindset of like genuinely, truly feeling as if like the afterlife is as real or more real than like the the material reality that you live. And
I guess the way to put it is knowing that the afterlife is real, right? Because that's how they would have described it.
Yeah, they
It
would
wouldn't have
not
been
have.
that they feel that it's real, it's that they know that it's real because that's like their knowledge structure.
yeah, exactly. Well, and it's I think there's a kind of a bit of a parallel with like moving like things moving online, right? Where there's like a group of people that's like older generations. We talked about generations prior. Like older generations know that the online world is not real, right? And it's very different from the real, quote unquote, real world. And then like the newer generations that are like immersed in online, they feel and they know that the online world is real, right? Like to them, it is. I think there is a parallel there where it's like it is the same thing. Where it's like they truly believe that this is like
There's our modern
another
example.
reality.
Because I knew there was something in the modern world that was very similar, and it's NFTs. Because people would buy real artwork and destroy it, but make an NFT of it, and now the NFT is the real deal, and you guys have to buy the NFT if you want the artwork, because the artwork in the real world, in the flesh world, has been destroyed. Although I think it's arguable as to the wealth of an artwork, but that would be an analog in the modern day.
Well, I think that to be fair, like to broaden that, like I think in the modern world, you see a lot of people giving away like real world material wealth for online, like virtual like wealth, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like people will trade their money or whatever and time and what labor for totally virtual things, right? And it's because I think to do that, to rationally do that, you have to like buy into the virtual world being like as important or more important than the real world. And I think that's going back to the original topic. Like I think that would be like one kind of a almost very analogous situation where you can see why ancient peoples would do the same with burials and sacrifice and all that stuff for the afterlife, because to them that'd be like the same thing as a virtual world. It's like this world beyond the real that's as real or more real and more important, especially. I think that
they just had the gene that allowed them to plug into the afterlife and see it the way we have cell phones that allow us to plug into the internet and see it from anywhere. We just lost that somewhere along the way.
Yeah, no psychedelics.
I feel as though, with the religion thing, it kind of. I mean, I thought of it when talking about it, but one of the reasons it didn't seem as preeminent to me was just thinking of it in the current context where you have Christianity, and like that's our modern burial system, even for most secular people, is based on the Christian tradition, and that's where. I don't know if it would have predated the Christians, but the Christians definitely did not go in for the commonly throwing in a lot of stuff with their dead guys. And the point being there is that I wonder if that's sort of not throwing in a lot of stuff in the grave. Maybe the Jews didn't as well. I don't know about Jewish burial traditions. But like I wonder if that gives an objective advantage, we're not throwing away 1% of our wealth every generation by burying it with our leader, and through the generations, that cumulative advantage gives you an edge by believing in a system that doesn't discard their own wealth.
I don't know, because I mean, if you're gonna make that argument for Christianity, like the Christian Church or like the Catholic Church was not exactly like the poster child for like efficiency with utilizing wealth and resource. Like,
well, that's the other. That's another good point that I wanted to bring up is like maybe there's, and it definitely ties in with the religion thing, because maybe there's a continuum on the same scale as monument building and opulence and Like, do you need that cathedral? Like, is that a useful employment of 300 years of manual labor? I mean, it probably could have been more productively spent.
I don't think so, to be honest. Like I think that those, like, it depends on what cathedral and at what time, but I think a lot of those things have incredible benefit in like focusing a society and getting it to be able to, like, to, I guess, hit a new paradigm. Like, this is what Jung thought. He thought that like Christianity, this might have been Nietzsche, but it was one of the two, believed that the subservience to Christianity and that type of thinking was enabled the type of mind, like I guess they would be like, quote unquote, the European mind, to be able to come up with stuff like science. And if it hadn't had that level of focus and dedication, it just never would have, we would never as a species gotten to that point without like that singular focus on, and that includes like spending 300 years dedicated generation after generation to building one cathedral, right? Like, I was
gonna say, it sounds a little bit like cope to me, but like the Chinese had plenty of science and they didn't have Christianity, but
yeah, but I think that they would have been building things as well, right?
I think we're I don't like. I'm not saying it's definitely a continuum, but I think the argument could be presented in the same vein, although not as drastic as that 300 years working together on one project. But that maybe like sacrificing the wealth for these burials sort of reifies the afterlife for the tribe or the group, in which case the sacrifice of the wealth actually does have a real practical effect in a similar way that building a monument did in later societies that were more complex.
Well, I also think that like, at least in the initial stages, like, sacrifice itself is served an incredible purpose, in the sense that like, human beings didn't start off with the knowledge of, like, you need to sacrifice things in the present in order to improve the future. Like, everybody kind of understands that at a base level, right? But as we were evolving as a species, like, we wouldn't come preloaded with that idea. It's something that we had to figure out over, like, thousands of years as we became conscious and became more and more sophisticated. And I think that's part of the reason why sacrifice.
Whole argument right there.
What's that?
Like, I think that's a whole argument right there. Whether or not we would have come preloaded with it, that's pretty much impossible to argue, or impossible to demonstrate.
I think but it's like, I don't think, like, we obviously would not have come preloaded with it, because we evolved up from chimps. Like, chimps don't
Homo
get that.
sapiens might have come preloaded with it.
Yeah,
Homo erectus might have been the one to develop it.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. Like, pushing it further back, it's like that had to come from somewhere. The idea of sacrifice, like, that idea would not have just sprung up. Like, it wouldn't have sprung up just from out of the either, right? It's not like that's a functionality that we would have somehow learned, right? And precursors to Homo sapiens would have also had like a level of consciousness, and they would have had to figure that out from a conscious point of view, right? And so I think that that's where the idea of sacrifice is actually, like, it served an actual purpose into getting us more evolutionarily fit.
Well, I think regardless of when it evolved or whatever, I think there's definitely something to, like, the cultural understanding of an idea or of ideas. Like, humans, even if they have like a nature towards something, that can be like reinforced and enhanced by like a cultural understanding and like practice of it, right? Like, for example, like rational thinking. Like, human nature has an ability to rationally think. Like, there's the raw compute power or whatever, but obviously if you have a culture that essentially teaches that and like teaches methods behind rational thinking and then articulates out the principles of what makes proper rational thinking versus what doesn't, etc., and you have a deep culture that emphasizes all that stuff. People that are steeped in that are going to be much more sophisticated in their rational thinking than a culture that has zero emphasis or understanding of it. Like the culture that has zero understanding and emphasis might do some rational thinking, but it won't be as often, as deep, and as like powerful as the culture that has the tradition of learning about it, right? Like, so I think even if it evolved independently, well before modern humans, definitely we deepened our understanding of like those concepts of the future, right? Like of future and sacrifice and the benefit of sacrificing the present for the future in stories and that kind of thing.
I mean, with that exact line of reasoning, like you can see the evolution of sacrifice once again in Christianity, because it goes from sacrificing animals in Judaism to the symbolic. Well, I guess if you're Catholic, the literal sacrifice of Jesus. So you do it every mass and cannibalize, as the Protestants always dislike, or I think it's sects of Protestants. And then all the non-Christians definitely just call Christians cannibals. they love that one. But yeah, the sacrifice turned into bread instead of animals. And you get to eat it. Although a lot of sacrificial animals were eaten. It just depends on precisely the sacrifice. With the rationality one, just as a somewhat of an aside, I always like the example that, well, my pet theory is that there's people who just intuitively think logically and rationalize, and that's just the way they view the world. And what had to happen for the advancement of the general society was Aristotle codifying logic so that he could teach it as a way to view the world to pretty much anybody who wanted to learn about it, as opposed to just kind of being an intuitive thing that smart people, logical people viewed the world as. And yeah, before Aristotle, logic wasn't a codified thing that you could teach a set of rules to, even though it's very obvious in hindsight, having lived in a society that's had 2,500 years of Aristotelian logic ingrained into it and taught to like elementary schoolers practically. It seems intuitively obvious how logic works, but there are a lot of people who had to learn it.
Yeah, and there's like, it goes way beyond just like logic. Like I know that in intelligence research, even like a lot of the intelligence testing done on developing populations was like nonverbal Raven matrices, which is like pattern recognition and the kind of thing. And what they found is that like even that is like Western populations that have a high amount of education massively outperform on those because like there's a degree of like learning that goes along with that. Like it's not even that, which is not even, it's not a verbal thing. It's not really, you wouldn't necessarily intuitively think that something like that is like that deeply caught up in, environmental learning practice or whatever. It actually does have quite a bit of learned component to it.
A good example of that, I think it was Vinogradova, a Russian neuroscientist. He was interacting with like, they were people who were basically uncontacted in the Russian steppes, and one of the things that he tested with them, I think it was Vinogradova, it could have been a different scientist, but it was one of the, might have been Luria, but anyways, when they started interacting with these people and trying to run some experiments with them, one of the things that they noticed is like they would give them different colors to categorize, like just color swatches that were different shades of like blue, green, yellow, and they're like, oh, categorize these, like, match them with other ones that are similar. And the people couldn't do it. They're like, what are you talking about? That's impossible. Like they did not have like it's very, I don't even know what you would call it, but
categories.
they wouldn't
They
even
didn't
be
have the
able to.
mental categories.
Yeah, they wouldn't even have exactly. It's like they don't have the mental categories in order to actually be able to do such a thing. But what they noticed is as the contact increased with these people, and some of the younger ones would start to have like go out towards the bigger cities and then come back because they wanted to get various products and whatnot for their little rural, extremely rural villages. Those people, the more that they got exposed, the more that they would do really well on these tests. Like they would start to actually match up with the what would just be like the regular Russian citizen who had some level of education, like at least a Russian like kind of like city person. But
Yeah, categories are really weird because I think it might have even been the same guy, but it was definitely tribes in Russia. And they found the steppe peoples, if you ask them to categorize, say, a variety of weapons, a variety of animals, but then specifically there was a bow, an arrow, and a rabbit. And the bow and arrow and the rabbit would be in the same category because you hunted the rabbit with the bow and arrow.
yeah,
But then obviously the Russians put the weapons all together and the animals all together, and the bow and arrow and the rabbit wouldn't be in the same category.
yeah. I think it is Vinogradova. I think he did that. I remember reading about that as well.
So it's just a different way of conceptualizing on a higher conscious plane.
Well,
Or
if you
probably
listen to the
lower, depending on how
leftists,
you wanna see it.
yeah, exactly. I was going to say it's like, man, I know quite a few individuals who would say that is not true. We're the lower plane when it comes to logic. And I actually do think there's a little bit of merit in that to some degree. But
Well, talking about the logic of the primitive peoples, the other thing I was spitballing in my head when thinking about bearing all this wealth to sort of avoid the religious argument would be potentially an economic argument, and it's kind of convoluted, but basically the steppe peoples were perfectly well aware that when they started making contact with civilization and getting the goods of civilization into their tribes, it started making them soft, and that if they got too soft, then the other steppe peoples would kill them, or the civilized peoples would conquer their land. And so they had to avoid getting too soft. And so that it could have been sort of an economic maneuver in order to remove this section of wealth to give people the drive to keep raiding and looting, or if they were a softer tribe, trading and being productive rather than resting on their laurels with this newfound wealth and getting wiped out in the long term. And the other group I was thinking of that for that maybe is even more appropriate is the Vikings, because there's studies of the Vikings during the Viking Age, and they said there was noticeable inflation in Scandinavia with how much wealth they were bringing back from the rest of Europe and looting, because there were never many people in Scandinavia, and they were looting the suburbs of Constantinople and Rome and Paris. They're making crazy money. But then when a rich Viking would die, you'd kill his slaves, you'd kill his horses, you'd throw him on his longship with a bunch of gold and treasures, and you'd burn it down to the bottom of the ocean. It's like, well, there's some wealth destruction. Now, you young men, go out and you loot Constantinople and you make your egg.
That's like the in the modern world the equivalent of like donating all your money to charity when you're when you're rich and your kids get nothing. Yeah, I think that's like it. There definitely could be some of that, right? Because it wouldn't be that hard for people to notice, like, wow, if you just give your kids a bunch of stuff, then they turn into like layabout useless potatoes, and then it kind of becomes like a cultural knowledge that you need to like set your kids at 0 to get them to like actually give a shit and try.
Yeah, there's there's that term, hard men create soft times creates soft men create hard times create hard men, and cycle.
The old cycle of history.
Yeah, basically, we are definitely in that soft time now.
It's also like the rags to riches, back to rags in 3 generations, where
Yeah, rags
That's
to
like,
rags in 3 generations. Oh, that's a really good one because I've seen that happen. Like personally, it's really crazy.
yeah, I don't know. Like, I think it could definitely play a part. I'd be surprised if there was, because you definitely see a ton of also the opposite, where wealthy, the wealthy like spend a ton of time and effort like ensuring great inheritance essentially for their kids. So I although yeah, I guess it would be cultural dependent, right? Like the
Yeah,
Vikings
well,
might have a different view than the whatever the English noblemen or whatever. Like, but there's definitely both sides of the coin, right?
Yeah,
yeah. I mean, you definitely see in the settled tribes that those nomadic raiders are raiding is that would definitely be their approach. Would be, and they would leave a lot for their kids, and they would also destroy their own wealth potentially. Like, I was thinking of China. The best example I could think of would be like the Terracotta Army, where they just sealed that thing up and filled it with mercury, and they're like, "Yeah, this is sick, guys," and nobody saw it again for thousands of years, hundreds of years. I don't actually know how old the Terracotta Army was,
I think it's a couple thousand years old, but I don't know for sure either.
but super impressive feat of manufacturing, and then you just seal it up and call it good. But I'm sure his kids were still had plenty of wealth to go around, and his society definitely still had plenty of wealth to go around. So it'd be a bit of a more difficult point to make that sort of economic argument, because it's not like you might be depriving 0.01% of the wealth as opposed to like maybe 5-10% of the wealth.
Yeah, I find the religious and spiritual argument just more compelling, I guess, because it's just that is such the main difference between
The good old days and now.
yeah, like the different like China and or ancient China and ancient Norse cultures and all that. Like they all have that same difference, whereas like they were very different from each other, and they still all have this like proclivity, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. It's probably a bit of column A, bit of column B, but I would put the primary driver on just like everyone being obsessed with the afterlife and truly buying into it.
yeah, I would agree with that. That's that's a lot of what the Egyptians did, right? They wanted their wealth in the afterlife.
I wonder.
They also wanted pyramids to look sick.
I do wonder, like, if the modern era will get an equivalent, or like, I don't know.
In the metaverse, it'll all be in the metaverse. It'll be saved in a backup.
Because there is a lot of like, obviously, when religion trends down, people recreate things religious, like rites and passages and things, just in other ways. And I'm just like, I'm racking my brain for like something similar in the modern era, like that people do, and I can't really think of anything that springs to mind as like a true parallel to.
Well, it's like on the individual level, like what you were saying with the virtual exchange, like where people spend real money for virtual assets or interactions or whatever they'd spend it on. Like I definitely see that being a bit of a parallel on an individual level, but on like the society-wide level, it's
but it's not really like an immortalization of themselves, right? Like that's where exactly. I really see the sacrifice and the burial is like sending off someone, like,
because no one's appreciating the fact that you have every picture unlocked in your mobile phone game. That's not going down in the history books or in people's collective unconscious or conscious.
Well, it's just like, if I was to think of like the parallel, it'd be like, what are the rich people doing, right? Because it's like, this is like, this whole issue is really the kind of the 1%ers of the ancient society, right? Like you didn't have poor people doing this.
Yeah. Like even in a tribe, like it'd be the chieftain and maybe like some of the leading men, not everybody.
Yeah, your average person didn't get a
pretty mind-blown by how many step burial mounds they found in Russia when they're researching these things. I heard it was tens of thousands until the low hundreds, or low hundred thousands, or yeah, like 100 and some thousand, which is just an astonishing number. But then you realize that they had the same culture in the steppe for roughly 3,000 years. Maybe not the same, but very similar in terms of burial practices and
I'm
nomadic
not
lifestyle.
surprised. I heard you can just ground penetrating radar pretty much any square kilometer of land in the world, and you get about 200 corpses.
Oh God.
So, not that surprising.
Man, maybe it will be metaverse stuff. Zuckerberg will be the first.
No,
The metaverse is Zuckerberg's funeral pyre, and nobody's ever going to look at it again, and he spent billions of dollars on it.
It better be, given how fucking god awful it is.
I feel like
You should be
Zuckerberg
buried there.
is like, he doesn't use Facebook, he doesn't use the metaverse. He's got like a fucking flip burner phone, and like like that's what I get out of like the tech guys, is like they've realized like the horror of their creation, they don't use it.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
reading I can't remember which book it was on this, and
Except Musk. Musk is a confirmed Twitter addict.
yeah, there's a few of them that have just lost their minds on there.
Musk is a little bit like Brave New World type motherfucker. Like he's also been like just hammering on that weight loss drug.
I
that
know,
kills you.
semaglutide, that fucking god awful stuff.
Like if ever, like I personally kind of like Musk, but like there's a lot of haters, and it's like the one solace they can take is that guy's probably gonna die in the next 10 years just due to like complete shit, like job taking care of his own body. Like
It's
insane.
so crazy how much money he has and just
but his
literally
hair's
spends
better.
none of it. Like, spends none of the billions on just like hiring professional chefs and trainers. And it's like, man, you could have all of this stuff paid for, taken care of to the best degree that any human on earth can afford, and you just give me a prescription for this stuff that's gonna rot away my bones. Jesus, it's just so weird.
Yes, yeah. I guess Musk has a few like sacrifices to the wealth gods, just shooting his car into space.
Yeah,
It's
that's
like-
a good one.
Like
Buying Twitter.
Yeah, that was a huge fucking dumpster fire.
yeah,
of wealth.
talk about shoveling money into the fucking ground.
Yeah. We called, like, in the descriptions it says wealth destruction. It's like, there you go. Just bang on.
To be fair, like that's more of a sacrifice, like a worthy sacrifice. Like
Yeah.
he took one for the team. He's like, okay, I gotta burn like 40-50 billion here, but it's gonna be worth it because Twitter needs to change. Like,
You could say the
Twitter
N-word on Twitter again.
well, and
I actually don't know
worst
if you
case
can.
scenario is Twitter falls apart, which is like
The best
cares?
case scenario.
Yeah.
it's
Who
like the
gives a shit?
second, like he either fixes it or it dies trying. Like it's a win-win,
Yeah.
honestly. Like there's no downside, except for his like $40 billion or whatever. Like
Don't worry, once
Somebody-
SpaceX goes public, he'll make that back times 5.
he might be a bit butthurt about the whole 40 billion gone, but
As Imperator of Mars, he'll have bigger problems.
Yeah, but he can
Yeah,
solve
that-
them through execution, so it'll be fine.
that might be another like area of like sending your wealth out into space type thing.
Man,
Yeah, it is
space
like-
exploration should be the new cultural norm. Invest your billions into absurdly inefficient space projects. I think that kind of is actually, now that I think about it.
I was listening
Most-
to, what's
a
his
lot
name?
of those didn't work out.
Oh my god. Just trying to remember
Oh,
the
yeah,
author.
him.
He's he wrote Snow Crash and some other stuff. He's like a really famous. He's like the godfather of modern cyberpunk. Neil Stevenson, like, and he's like I think he is a PhD in physics. So like he writes a lot of his stories are always like based in science because he'll just go research the shit out of them. And I was listening to him talk, and he was just saying that like the only reason people are actually gonna go truly into like space to do like like longer standing missions is not gonna be there's not gonna be like economic gain in them. It's gonna be like a religious thing. It's like, yeah, but we should do that anyways. Like that should become a religion because that's
The
fucking
other thing-
crazy and cool.
We haven't brought up though that I think is distinct from religion, but it's something that doesn't drive many people anymore. Is good old fashioned glory. Doing it for the glory was definitely a move back in the day,
Scavola.
and I could see space being the glory race for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think space might be both, right? Like it'll be like a. I could see it being like the billionaire like legacy, right?
I was going to
Because
say,
it's
it
like,
kind
yeah.
of seems like a bit of a dick measuring contest already between some of the billionaires.
With Musk, it does seem like he's truly got that religious aspect on the space, as opposed to just the glory seeking of,
I think like his
who is Blue Origin?
Bezos with
Bezos,
Yeah.
and then you have Richard Branson, who's like the
Like
virgin
putting a
billionaire.
hotel in space, like that's like I want everyone to know my name. Whereas colonizing Mars to propagate the human species on another planet, it's more religious undertones.
yeah, it's religious and just like pure survivalist in a sense. And like I
like
listened to him talk
seeding
about
the
it.
universe.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's pretty cool. He's like I remember he said that it's like, human consciousness is a special thing and it would be a shame to lose it. So, we need contingency plans basically. Like we have a lot more to discover about ourselves and it would be a shame to have that journey cut short. I thought that was pretty, it's like it that definitely has like some real religious undertones to it, and I think it is a mission well worth taking on.
Yeah, I don't know. Like
I just don't have billions of dollars to do it, so glad somebody's trying.
Bezos and Richard Branson, just sad, low energy,
Yeah,
shitty projects.
but they burned their billions, as God intended.
To be fair, I think Bezos is probably helping out in terms of advancing. At least he's contributing to like the technology of it and stuff. Still, seems like Virgin Galactic or whatever. Just
Dunzo.
a waste of capital, like complete abomination. But I mean, I guess that's how it works, right? Like you got 5-10 pokers in the fire, and
Yeah, hopefully one of them works.
One thing I kept trying to force, but I could not make the connection in any sort of viable way. and even the most tenuous fashion was some sort of connection between throwing money at super risky investments in the stock market and the old school destruction of wealth. I feel like there's something to be made there, very tenuously, but
I think they're pretty. I think like that's like truly one is just gambling, right? Like that's like a impulse as old as time for humans, right? It's just like
yeah,
risk it for the biscuit. Like I don't know, you see that all the time, and
but like back in the day, if you had a risk it for the biscuit attitude, and like sacrificed a goat to Zeus, and then went off to battle, maybe there's a bit of a connection there.
Well,
I think it's a psychological thing, right?
You burn some of your fucking meme coin and then YOLO the rest of your portfolio. I don't know if the parallel is.
Sacrifice to the gods at the stock market.
Yeah,
I pray to you, dear God.
Rip.
Rip.
Was that me or you?
That might have been me. Technically.
Yeah, I also heard there was a technical difficulty, so it must have been the con.
I think my internet is a tad bit shaky, but what can you do? Canadian internet providers just top of the business.
Oh well,
Literally leave Canada.
Sacrificing a goat. That's my first suggestion.
Bring us. Honestly, that's probably better than trying to rely on Robellus to make it better.
You might actually get somewhere.
Sacrificing a goat has higher success probability than calling Robellus for issues like this. It's just a complete loss. I don't know. Do you want to like keep going on this one, or I was kind of because I had like a tangent somewhat related to this topic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I might as well go on to that, I'd say.
Because it's pretty closely related, and that's just like the concept of like burial and just and like human mourning, I guess, like just the whole cost, I guess, of like in terms of like dealing with death in humans. Like it is kind of a weird thing. I've read like some like psychological evolutionary psychology accounts or whatever, like proposed theories, and I think some of them are interesting, but it is still just kind of difficult to explain. Like, and the other weird one is like elephants seem to be the other like species that goes hard on like the
Yeah, I was gonna actually mention
burial
that.
and mourning, and it's just like I don't know, like it's just
That's-
a weird.
Because they have big brains.
True, but I don't think as far as I know, like elephants are like much more human-like in this respect than like chimps.
Yeah, no, I think
example.
I've heard that as well. That
Yeah, they come back to burial sites, which is like, or the death sites. They don't. I don't think they actually. They're not digging holes and tossing their dead
No,
bodies in. But
I think they have been known to like cover dead
Yeah.
bodies with foliage.
yeah, I think that's what it is. But it's not like a.
It's not like a human
not
burial.
6 foot
There's,
under,
yeah.
but
yeah, there's no fucking 10-gun salute, but like it's more than nothing as far as I understand it. Which is again like I just find it weird that like as far as I know, there's not really any. There's not the same similar behavior in like chimps and other primate species, and then elephants is the one where you see like the most similar behavior. And I don't know, it's just very odd, and would be curious.
elephants are pretty close to humans for their reproduction, are they not? Like usually it's like 2 kids per elephant's couple.
Like their
K value
number
or
and
whatever?
their lifespan.
Yeah, I don't know about the lifespan, but just like the reproductive on the reproduction scale, I thought they were similar to humans.
Sounds right, but I don't know. I'm very not an elephant expert. I've heard this like burial and mourning parallel in some of the reading I did, and I don't like the evolutionary psychology explanation that I've seen is like you want to know why people died essentially because you want to avoid the like what happened to them kind of thing, which is like seems to be like the most put forward thing. It's like emotionally salient because dying is emotionally salient and you want to like remember it, which I think is obviously part of the explanation, but I feel like it's just not enough, or not like clearly not a full
Well, like
explanation.
maybe that's if the push that gets the whole thing started in like Homo habilis or something, but then it develops and grows legs and moves on for its own other purposes and becomes what it is in us.
I don't know, because it's like there's a lot of like remembering the dead as well, like in humans, like that's a big thing, like like kind of like repeating the life, like telling stories about the life of, and like remember, like that's a big part of like the mourning process and like all this stuff. And I wonder if it's just like because humans are a species that does a lot of like knowledge transmission across generation. I don't know, like
And so you figure that they might be like a part of that is to transmit some more knowledge, like try to make it salient to the people and pass it on.
yeah, like just like it helps transmit knowledge down the generations because you have this emotional thing that you like of like the older generation, because obviously older people are more likely to die, and then you like basically like there's a emotional reaction which then like naturally causes you to like talk and reminisce and like repeat, and you know what I mean, like kind of essentially
exchanging information in a sense.
like post-mortem on their life, like literally, and that would contain like theoretically that in like a traditional culture that would contain a lot of like learning and cultural knowledge, right? Like you would just naturally within that there'd be a lot of like, oh, he went to this like hunting spot, or like he
He
there'd
loved
be
this place.
like
Always
all that
brought
stuff.
the best meat back from that watering hole.
Or remember how he, made the whatever frickin' bow or whatever. Remember how she used to prepare the berries, or I don't know
Well,
what.
another one I can think of when you're talking like the culture and clan around them, and I think this would apply maybe even more so to like when you have celebrity deaths in larger cultures where the people wouldn't have personally known the person, but they still mourn them. Is there's probably an aspect of sort of homogenizing the memory of that person in society, like by reminiscing and discussing their life, everyone comes to an agreement, sort of consensus on who that person was and what they meant. Because now that they're dead, like you can actually do that without them following it up by behaving in a way that people interpret it differently. And having everyone have the same sort of idea of who they were would be valuable just for social cohesion. And then it goes back to like using them as an example or reference or story in the future.
Yeah, I didn't think about that, but I could see that kind of just like getting everyone on the same page before kind of moving on, essentially, and then
yeah, so it's not like, oh, remember Bill? Yeah, I fucking hate Bill. No, Bill was a great guy. Like that'd be awkward.
Yeah, after a couple weeks of like everyone has kind of like gotten their piece out, and then like, oh, remember Bill, and everyone kind of has a settled opinion on Bill because they've already discussed it, and like doesn't. Yeah,
It doesn't cause a bunch of friction within the tribe
because it's already been like mediated essentially.
And now that Bill's not there, he's not going to foul up that mediation by going and being an asshole and ruining everyone's opinion after they decided he was a nice guy all along.
Yeah, exactly. Bill, let's just say, was better off dead for sure. Like a giant dickhead. Yeah, I don't know.
The one crackpot theory I've got through like the more behavioral psychology aspect is that with old people, you definitely see like another human being is a massive constellation of various stimulus for everyone around them. And you often do see old elderly couples either die in a very short period between each other, or one will pass and then the other one will just decline precipitously. Because in a lot of cases, well, the current understanding when you look at the brains, in a lot of cases, dementia or other cognitive degeneracies can be masked by if one of the partners has higher functioning, then they just give subtle cues to the other partner that keep them going on the right track. And then when they're gone, it's like, oh, wow, this guy's absolutely incapable of living on his own. But when his wife was with him, he seemed perfectly fine.
So the wife was backpacking?
Yeah, so just like sort of your brain firing off those stimuli to kind of, remind you what you're supposed to be doing. I mean, you could also say as a memory, but, like remind you of the person and like what that person would have been providing to you in that context. But now they're gone, but like your brain is still firing it off to like, achieve an effect that's desired that was originally imprinted when they were there.
I guess that's like a more like micro version of like the kind of like the thing I was saying of like the passing down of the knowledge, right? It's like,
yeah,
you're essentially extracting out their the useful stimulus or cues or whatever that they were leaving by remembering them, more or less, is what you're saying.
Yeah. So like in a tribal sense, like you go hunting with your brother and then like one day your brother dies and then like you're sad and mourning him, but it means that you're never going to forget all the things your brother taught you when you were out hunting together or whatever.
Yeah, and like if you see the animal, you remember your brother, which then like cues all the things that your brother would have cued for you when you're hunting with him actually directly, right? Like oh, my brother used to like test the wind or whatever, or some shit, and then you're like, oh, I need to do that, or you just automatically do it without even thinking about it, because there's that like mental connection.
Then he would tell me how much of a retard I am for doing this. Oh, don't miss that.
The reason this comes up to me is because I find myself thinking in that way so often, although the people I use as examples usually aren't dead. But once they are dead, I imagine I'll still be thinking in that fashion.
They're just gone from your life, essentially.
Yeah. It's like they're still out there somewhere, but like I haven't talked to them in years.
Classic.
Still influenced by behavior.
Yeah, I think that's definitely an interesting theory. Again, like evolutionary psychology, so a lot of it is tough to test, but I'm sure someone will eventually come up with like a good, half decent theory, and then that actually has like some testable predictions. I think it will be one of those things that gets nailed down a bit more over the coming decades, because there seems to be a lot of progress in like the evolutionary psychology front.
Just give me a tribe of chimps and a laboratory and a few generations, and we'll have them burying their dead in no time.
Just give me a Chinese test city that they definitely have, where they're running like insanely unethical evolutionary psychology experiments, and then steal the data. Like I guarantee you, like some of these more what would you call it? Countries that are a little less scrupulous about their ethical treatment of people are doing some pretty crazy like experiments on human learning and human psychology that are
how do all these Uyghur babies do when they're raised with no parents and no adult supervision?
Or what if we just subject them to crazy violent stimulus from age 0? Or like, I'm sure I have a high degree of confidence that some of these sketchy regimes are doing some of those types of tests. Like, I mean,
you'd win money on that bet all day long for sure.
Well, just like the Nazis and the Imperial Japanese.
Yeah, exactly.
Did.
It's like
a very public record, and then what the USSR did, much less public record, because their country didn't get defeated in a war.
Well, and I mean, even like the quote unquote good guys, like Americans and Western Europeans and stuff, when they had ethical considerations stuff, they're doing fucked up experiments, and like it was just they're still doing. I'm sure America still does some fucked up shit. It's all less of it.
Yeah, it's all black ops.
Well, I'm sure less of it because it is a lot harder in somewhere like America to keep things under wraps these days. Like, there's a lot more transparency, but there's not perfect transparency, right?
Well,
so it's like
you make one Unabomber, and hopefully you start to question what you're actually doing with some of these fucked up experiments.
Yeah, exactly. Like, but if America was doing it in the 60s and 70s, is China doing it in the 2020s? Yeah, for sure, 100%. And is America doing it into the 2020s, just maybe slightly less crazy? Probably. Like, they're probably a little bit more reasonable, but they're
definitely going to be doing things that are still, people
ethically suspect.
Not be too pleased about.
They might farm it out to jurisdictions that are harder to supervise, but
like Wuhan.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know. It is a weird one to think about. Those that I think. I mean, that's a topic for another day.
But you're talking about mourning and burials. I feel like we mostly went over mourning, but the other thing that always gets me is cremation. Like, cremation has always been, well, maybe not always, but it seems like an enormous part of a ton of cultures. And it's still kind of not a huge thing in the West. I don't know what the numbers actually are. But just that, like, fundamental difference. But it seems to be that human beings are pretty much fine with the idea of cremation or burial, generally speaking. But then, like, it's a cultural decision more so than... Like, obviously, the individual makes the final decision, but whether or not you were buried or cremated throughout history usually just depended on what culture you're in.
Yeah, I think it's just the disposing of bodies is maybe a bit more straightforward, I guess, in terms of, like, humans would want to dispose of bodies because they would be like a host for like all sorts of fucked up disease and parasites and shit, and you would want to like do something post death to like mitigate that. If you're going to interact with the body, either burying it, cremating it, or there's a bunch of like, and there's
there's
like
the
a bunch
sky
of
burials in Tibet, I believe.
and there's like embalming.
Not interacting with the body after a sky burial, I don't think.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I mean.
Yeah.
But I guess maybe it's just there's more of a common sense answer to that, but there might be some complexity. But like,
There's some weird things though, because the sky burials brought to mind the Zoroastrians, which were the original Persian religion. I believe they would just have a tower where they'd leave the dead bodies out on top of a tower and just let the carrion birds feed on them.
Well, that's what the sky burials are in Tibet, right? They're just the birds eat them all.
Yeah, so that's a weird alternative, because that wasn't sort of a disgraceful thing in those cultures, but then in ancient Rome, it was you got cremated if you were respected, but if you weren't, you just got thrown in the river, washed out to the Mediterranean.
thrown in the river. That's very Roman.
They were very upset with the Emperor Tiberius, and then the river going through Rome was the Tiber, so they were chanting, throw Tiberius in the Tiber. That was the crowd's chant, because the Roman mobs were legendary. They didn't do it, though. They cremated him because he was an emperor.
Very creative chants, even back then.
Yeah. Well, the Romans were just pretty much presaged everything we do in this day and age.
It's not quite as pithy as "Let's Go Brandon," but
Yeah.
Super creative as usual.
But yeah, so definitely the burial and cremation, and then a sort of monument over the burial ground, or the burial ground being a monument that you can interact with. And then obviously the ashes are the easiest thing, because you can put them in an urn and either have them in your home or in a cemetery with monuments. The most interesting burial, and it's not even a known burial, it's an alleged burial, but for Genghis Khan, they say they buried him with basically the biggest possible burial that's ever been done, probably. And it's argued as to whether the people who made his burial ground, slaughtered all the sacrificial animals, buried him and covered it up, were murdered so that they couldn't disclose the location, or whether they were murdered so they couldn't disclose the location, and the people who murdered them were then murdered so that they couldn't disclose the location. But until this day, nobody's found Genghis Khan's burial site.
Well, whatever they did, they did it right.
We don't want anybody to know where he is, or because I think the Mongolian idea was that he ascended to godhood, so nobody was ever supposed to find this burial site or be able to pay their respects at it, because he's not even there. He's ascended to godhood.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they had to do the biggest burial ever because it was Genghis Khan. So it's this weird
he's not dead kind of thing, but he's dead, but he's not dead.
He's passed on. He's not there anymore. But because everyone gets a big burial, he had to get the biggest burial.
Yeah, that's, I don't know, that's pretty crazy. That they if it was really a big burial with some sort of monument, it's interesting they haven't found it.
Well, they say that it didn't have a monument. They say they purposely made it so that it was hidden, but it was supposed to have the most wealth, the most horses sacrificed. A lot of these steppe burials, mounds, usually are mounds, would have a couple horses, maybe, if they're really big, hundreds of horses. So you'd imagine Genghis Khan's would have thousands of horses. It's
that's what I mean. It would have been a huge burial site. They would have tried to hide it, right? But you know what I mean. It is surprising that they haven't uncovered. Theoretically, it's there's a couple thousand fucking horse skeletons plus a bunch of other shit.
Get some ground penetrating radar out there in Mongolia. Actually, that is the one thing I heard, is that generally speaking, the Mongolians to this day are not interested in finding it, so they're not conducive to anybody who wants to go on a Genghis Khan tomb finding mission.
Yeah, you might
Well,
run yourself into some problems. Like
can't
I'm
be
sure
any more
that
can't be any more dangerous than like checking out the Titanic. So
True.
no matter how pissed off the Mongolians are, take my chances. Rip.
Yeah, I don't know if that's the only comment I had there. I just find it interesting. I actually had not even thought about Europeans doing lots of cremating until hearing about the Romans doing it all the time, because I always associate it in my history with China and Japan, because Christians have obviously done burials for a long time.
There's definitely some cultures that can't cremate, or like it's like against their religious or cultural practices to cremate.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just
I can't think of any off the top of my head, but it sounds like something I've heard before.
yeah, because I think now that it's like a lot more common in the West, you'll see like instances where like, oh, we can't cremate the body, we have to bury it. It's part of our.
I think sects of Christianity are that way. Like some of the Protestants.
Yeah, there's so many goddamn sub lineages and
Oh, the best burial practice is obviously embalming, and or no, mummifying is the best. Mummifying is the goat, but they embalmed Alexander the Great, and apparently just had his dead body sitting in Alexandria for, I think it was almost 400 years. They don't know where it is now, but there's still theories that it exists out there. Somebody has it.
I'm surprised that there's like not like more people that get their body like professionally taxidermied or whatever, you know what I mean?
Oh, who was the There's a Roman. Yeah, there was a Roman who did that, and it was with his mother, one of the emperors. Got her taxidermy so he could visit her in the mausoleum. It's
I was gonna say like that's what I was
crazy.
thinking about. That's when you said that, Hubbard. That's what I was thinking about. I was like, I know of a person. There's definitely one I remember reading about.
No, but like in the modern era, now that it's like taxidermy is like very sophisticated, like I'm surprised you don't hear like every like once in a while like like in the New York Post like some creepy family that has like 6 people taxidermied hanging out in the living room.
My guess is that it's just there might actually be some rules on the books over it, or just most taxidermists are not that crazy. They're just like, no, I'm not touching a human being. No way.
But then the taxidermists themselves, there's got to be like that is a profession that has to attract fucked in the head people anyway. So then there's got to be like a few of them that are like thinking about it.
Yeah,
you know what I mean.
So like,
money talks.
Yeah, that's true. Here's $100 grand taxidermy my wife, please.
Or the guy's just like, wouldn't it be kind of cool if I had my grandma fucking chilling in the living room for the rest of my life? Like, I don't know. There's got to be a creepy taxidermist that is like thinking about it like that.
I recall hearing about. I think it was Roman families would have sort of busts of all the prominent, all the heads of the family before them attached to their mansions. But imagine just a hall of all your taxidermied ancestors.
Well, that's
just
struck in
hilarious poses.
There isn't some fucked rich family that hasn't done that.
There probably is. They just would never hear about it.
It's like go into their basement and there's like 6 generations of fucking human bodies that are just like chilling in pose.
The Rothschilds.
Yeah, like some weird. Like I don't know. I'm just surprised. I don't know. It seems like it is like a taboo in culture to do that.
Yeah, it definitely is.
And I'm just surprised that it hasn't been violated more often, and we don't hear about it more often. I don't know. It seems like something that most people just universally just agree is in bad taste and don't do it. Yeah, you shouldn't, hook your family members up on the mantle.
I guess that's why I find the Alexander thing so fascinating, because it's totally doable. But it was like only Alexander the Great was a big enough deal for people to not only do it, but then display it publicly for hundreds of years. That was the sort of Ptolemaic Egypt's symbol of
Wasn't-
authority. Was the
Wasn't
literal
Lenin
body.
laid out? Wasn't he like embalmed or whatever? and laid out?
Lenin was
like-
totally
Yeah, he was.
For, like,
embalmed
years
and his brain was studied or something.
There's been a couple examples, but again, like I was saying, like given that I don't know, I find it weird that it's like not more like there's not like more examples where like some, police like get called to a house and then they find like this horror show fucking taxidermic bodies or some shit. I don't know.
Bunch
Well,
of taxidermied
show.
dead
You
hookers.
say that now, and then it's like a couple of weeks later.
Like put it in a TV show
News
and
out
it'll
of
happen.
yeah.
Yeah, but that would require the TV show writers to be creative, as opposed to drawing from the news stories. So,
Yeah, it's not
True.
going to happen anytime. Well, it's definitely not going to happen now, but
well, now it might with ChatGPT in charge.
yeah, I don't know what. Yeah, that's true. It just
Dan,
feed it all
Dan
in.
going off the rails. Dan going off the rails, suggesting the taxidermy serial killer is the next Netflix special. Let's hope that would be entertaining. Do you guys got anything else, or do you want to call it there?
I
Yeah,
think we can call it there.
yeah. I think I don't have anything else that's
Yeah, I'm good.
going to expand anything more than what's already been said. All right. Well, thanks a lot for listening. Peace.